In this lesson, we're going to begin to discuss strokes. If you'd like to follow along, go into your File menu to Open, and in the Working Files folder, go into Chapter number 13 and select Stroke Secrets, and just click Open. Let's run through some of the basics of the stroke panel. Just click on the panel name to open it. Why don't we select the green curvy line? The first section of the panel towards the upper left is weight. That's how thick the stroke is. If I click my up arrow, it's increasing the weight 1 point with each click. If I click my down arrow, it's decreasing the weight 1 point with each click. If I go to the pop-up to the right of the weight field, I can choose an exact amount from the pop-up. The next section is cap. By default, it's using something called a butt cap. That means the stroke and the path begin and end in the same place. The stroke does not go beyond the path itself. It butts up against the end of the path. The next kind of a cap is a round cap, and it rounds the beginning and the end of the stroke. The next cap is projecting cap, and it's adding half the width of the weight to the beginning and the end of the stroke, so it extends beyond the path itself. Why don't we take a look at what this might be used for? I'm going to go to my zoom tool and zoom in on the magenta strokes in the lower right of my page. Go back to my selection tool, and I'm going to select one of these two strokes. It is a totally separate stroke from the other stroke with the same color. What I'm going to do is click and drag across both of these strokes with my selection tool. If I were to add a projecting cap, it's going to extend the stroke half the weight of the width on either end of the path. And you can see it's filling in that little empty square. Let me go back to a butt cap. And you can see because it's butting right up against the endpoints of the paths, you have a little empty space, a little empty square where it's not getting filled in. Adding a projecting cap fixes that problem. I'm going to zoom out to fit my page in the window. On a Mac, I'm going to hit Command 0. On a PC, Control 0. And now I'm going to zoom in on this zigzag shape towards the upper right and select it with my selection tool. The next area is called miter limit, and it says 4 in the field, and then there's a time sign. 4 times what? And what is it limiting? Well, it's 4 times whatever the weight is. So in this case, 4 times 15, which is 60. But what does it do? Well, these mitered points in the corners, it's limiting how long they can become. Any point that's greater than, in this case, 4 times 15, which is 60 points, will get beveled off. Watch what happens if I lower the miter limit to 3. Almost all of the mitered points are now beveled off. If I go down to 2, the one remaining point is beveled off because it was longer than 2 times 15, which is 30 points. I'm going to zoom out to fit my page again, Command 0, Control 0, and we're going to talk about joins. I'm going to select my square in the lower left-hand corner. By default, the way the corners are joined together, it's using something called a mitered join, which is kind of like a picture frame. It comes to points. The next kind of a join is a round join. Let me zoom in a lot closer so you can see what that does. It is actually rounding off the outside of all corners. Let me go back to my selection tool and go to bevel join. And you can see it's beveling off the corners. I'm going to go back to a miter join. In the next section, we're talking about aligning the stroke to the path. By default, the stroke is centered to the path. So half of the stroke is inside of this shape and half of it is outside of this shape. But if I go to the next alignment, it's align stroke to inside. Well, why would I ever want to do that? Well, let's make believe that this is the border of an ad, and an ad has to be a certain size. And I want the outside of my border to equal the size of the ad. If I have my stroke to the inside, the outside of the shape will remain consistently the same, even if I increase the weight or decrease the weight. So if the important part of your object, the important dimension, is the outside, use align stroke to inside. But what about align stroke to outside, which is the next choice? With this, the stroke is always entirely outside of the path. I might use this if this was a text frame. If it was a text frame and I had an inset for this text frame moving the text slightly in away from the stroke, and my text filled the frame beautifully. With the text frame, where the text is fitting into the inside, I'm always going to have the stroke to the outside. So if at some point I need to increase the weight of the stroke or decrease the weight of the stroke, it's not going to affect the inside dimensions of the object. Let me zoom out again. I'm going to press Command 0 on a Mac, Control 0 on a PC, and I'm going to select my green curvy shape again. And now we're going to talk about type, the different types of styles that you can apply to a stroke. If I click down on the pop-up menu, you can see there's lots of different styles. Various Dutch rules of different kinds. There's also some dashes. There's hashes. And there's also dots and diamonds and even wavy. But let me go to Japanese dots. The next section has to do with filling in the gaps in any stroke. So any stroke that has gaps, you can fill it in with any color that's available from your swatches panel. So if I made the gap cyan, you can see it's filling in those gaps. But I can also tint that gap color from 100%, let's say down to, how about 50? Let me go back to a solid stroke. So I'm going to get rid of my gap color. Go back to solid in the type of stroke pop-up. And why don't we talk about start and end? If I wanted to add an arrow or one of these symbols to the start of a stroke, let me select the curved arrow. And you can see it adds a curved arrow. I can do the same thing on the end. So this is great if you're working on some sort of a chart with callouts as part of your layout. We'll continue discussing strokes in the next lesson.